Hey everyone, it's Brandon here again for another video. We're doing another car video again because I don't give much of a shit anymore about production value. But anyway, so I want to make a video about drugs. I made videos about drugs in the past, but this is just going to be an overall video about what we should do with drug policy. You know, I live in the United States. Of course, you might say, you know, this is kind of tailored to the United States in some ways, but really it's not. It's something that could, I think, be applied universally. You know, there might be some limitations in certain corrupt countries, or more corrupt countries, might I say, but you know, overall, I think this would be a step in the right direction. And what is that step? I think the step is not decriminalization of all drugs, not decriminalization of some drugs, you know, not elevating some street drugs that have medicinal value to, you know, normal medical stature like other substances. No, what I'm talking about is the full legalization of every substance that, you know, people primarily use for altering their consciousness. And, you know, the only things that would be limited in this is, like, you know, if you had like some radioactive drug, which, you know, that does exist. You know, if you had some substance that was very dangerous to people on a different level, you know, maybe we wouldn't have that fully legalized. But you know, pretty much everything else, I mean, if it's not used frequently to create, you know, bombs or something, I mean, and the thing is, like, there are so many extremely dangerous substances out there that you could use very easily as weapons that you can buy completely legally. So the idea that, you know, we're you know, making drugs illegal for safety, just it's a bit odd. But why do I think this would be a good thing? Why would full legalization across the board, and I mean even for pharmaceutical drugs, full legalization, no script needed? Okay, so now let's get into the limitations and how this would work in my model here. So you would only be able to buy these substances from, you know, you might say pharmacies at first. I'm sure at some point, if it was, you know, literally all drugs were legal, you know, there would come a time when maybe just pharmacies wouldn't be able to handle the demand and just the economic side of things. So, you know, you might have other types of stores, but the idea is that you would have stores that, you know, are, you know, regulated by the government, that have to follow laws, and these are the only places where you can legally buy these substances. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, you know, if you can only buy these substances in these certain stores, you know, at like this, you know, kind of one price point or a price point that the legal market would have, you know, what's to say someone isn't just going to sell on their own? You know, what's to say that there isn't going to be the illegal sale of these substances? I think one of the things that would have to be worked into policy would be different things forcing the price of these substances down to the point where, which is very possible. You know, if we're talking about using economies of scale to produce these substances, you know, small time, you know, drug lab operators or growers or whatever wouldn't be able to compete with the prices that these larger companies would be able to do. But yeah, the idea is, there would be things in place to always keep the price down to a point where selling on the street just doesn't make much sense. Now, why is it a good thing to sell all substances, used for all psychoactive substances that people would want to take recreationally or medically or in whatever context, or spiritually, whatever context it is? Why is it a good idea to sell these in a certain government regulated store type only? And it's pretty simple. Dosage would be, very consistent, what I mean more so with that is potency. Potency would be rather consistent, or it would at least have to be labeled, how potent is this, version of the drug that's being sold. And then also, there would be clear dosage information. So, one of the main problems with especially hard drugs, or even, pharmaceutical drugs, commonly opiates, or opioids. One of the problems with this, and why it's become an epidemic, they say, in the United States and also, other places too, a lot of people have been overdosing on these substances. Why is this happening? Well, for one, the person is chasing a better high, and then, they gain a tolerance to the substance, and then of course, they're going to have to increase the dose to get the same effect or a better effect than they had before. And with certain drugs, the more that you do this, the more dangerous it becomes. Some drugs are very easy to overdose on. Why would this new system lower overdoses? Well, for one, if you just look at decriminalization, and really the best place we have to look at as an example, which is Portugal, their overdose rates went down by quite a bit when they turned on full decriminalization. And you got to think, in their example where they had full decriminalization, they didn't have these stores that were selling things with labeled potency and clear dosage. A big reason why these people are overdosing on certain drugs is because they don't know exactly how much they're putting in their body, and also there's a lot of these people are somewhat uninformed for what they're doing. I think a key thing that would be part of all of this is that before you buy a specific substance, or maybe it could be limited to a class of substances, before you buy cannabinoids, but really it'd probably be best to limit it, substance by substance. You would have to take a relatively detailed exam before you are able to buy these substances. There would be no gifting or individual to individual sale of these substances, other than the people who were allowed to do this by the government, who met those requirements, who had the proper education and showed reliable safety protocol in their doses and labeling and potency information over time. At any time, if a store or even a manufacturer is found to be mislabeling something to a good extent, to maybe make more money and, sell it as if the potency is a little higher or a little lower or whatever they're doing. If they're found to be not on the mark, pretty damn close to exactly what's in there, they would have all the rights to sell revoked. They would have all of it gone, all their rights to manufacture revoked. I mean, this would be pretty strict on the business side of things. But as far as, individuals obtaining these substances, the strict part would be the substances, you would have to pass an exam. Do you know what doses people usually take, and what effect do people experience at different doses? Of course, different drugs vary a lot, and even in the same drug itself, between individuals or across different people, the effects of drugs are going to vary a lot depending on dosage and potency and all of this. But they would the individual wanting to buy any of these substances would have to show a pretty high level of knowledge on what's going to happen when they take this substance and what's going to happen when they take different amounts of this substance. This might in the end, at a kind of end game level, really call for a lot more research, just on so many different substances. Ultimately, it would be really helpful to have research into how tolerance develops, and to what degree for the average person who's taking these substances, and how that affects what dose you need for a certain effect, and all of that. I mean, this could get pretty detailed, but anyway, yeah, I think the testing idea is really necessary, because people need to know what they're putting in their bodies, what effect it's going to have, likely what dose and potency levels they're going to experience an overdose at, or even less severe effects. When are they going to experience these things? People need to show knowledge of this before they are allowed to buy. And I think that's still good. I mean, of course, we would still have doctors writing prescriptions, but the difference here, I think, would be doctors would be writing prescriptions based on, okay, you have this condition, I think that you need around this dose to treat this condition. That doesn't mean you can only obtain this substance through me and my recommendation. But if you want to know a safe level to take of a certain substance for a certain illness, or even for spiritual purposes, recreational purposes, whatever, you could go to one of these experts and get recommendation. Yeah, I mean, some of the main benefits for this, for one, I think it is our right entirely to modify our consciousness however we so choose. I really think, as long as it is not directly harming another person, you should be allowed to do that. And a side note I just thought of, while people are taking these substances, if they have a history of using substances and, becoming violent or whatever, they would lose the right to buy these substances. And then, the only way that they could obtain them is by, trying to search through a very limited number of, criminal sellers who have very little incentive to even sell any of these substances. So it'd be very difficult for them to even obtain it. But anyway, so yeah, the first reason why I think this is important, I think, as an adult, at this point in time, I think we should no longer be treated like infants when it comes to substances, to psychoactive substances. I think it's time that we have more freedom here. I think we should have had it all along, but so yeah, there's the freedom aspect. There's the exploration of consciousness aspect. There's having freedom in that. I think that's the most important thing for me. It's the freedom itself. But after that, I think it will make it just drugs in general safer for practically everyone. And I think that's a good thing. Why will it be safer? Because people will know exactly what potency they're taking and of what substance. I mean, there are so many people who buy a drug on the street. They buy LSD, and then they end up actually buying NBOME, which has much different levels as far as what could be considered unsafe. To get the same effects as LSD, you might have to take a very dangerous dose, very close to overdose levels, and that's just one substance. So for one, you would know exactly what you're buying. You would know exactly how strong what you're buying is. You would know exactly what dose this is at. It would be clearly measured, labeled, and regulated, and regularly tested. Are the sellers and distributors actually giving people what they say they are? So yeah, you know exactly what you're taking. Also, there will be increased knowledge about how much should be taken to get what effect, what are the varying levels of danger and risk that come with different doses. And also, one thing on these exams would be not just dose, but route of administration. Route of administration is very important. Why? Because, if you take a certain drug intravenously versus snorting it, versus smoking it, versus taking it rectally, you have completely different levels that would cause an overdose in all of these cases, and any other routes of administration. The dose always changes as far as what's safe and what effect you'll get. It almost always changes. So people would have to know, for what route of administration, what doses were safe and what doses are dangerous and what effects will be experienced at these different dose levels. So anyway, that's one thing. You would know what you're buying. It's safer when you're taking something like that. I think we would also see a decrease in some of the nastier drugs, you might say. Like we'd probably have less people taking meth and heroin and PCP and bath salts. I mean, these drugs are demonized, and they might not be actually as bad as they sound in reality, but I'm using them as examples. So let's just say those are the worst of the worst drugs. How is making every substance, that can't, directly be used as a weapon or used to create some type of, crazy weapon that poses some giant health risk to people? How would making everything legal reduce the rates of use in these harder drugs? So you might first think, okay, heroin's legal for everybody. everybody's going to go out and do heroin. So, I mean, we see with the Portugal example, you know, that didn't happen at all, at least in that one country, in that one culture. You know, it's not perfect. More experimentation with this would need to be done. But, I mean, as far as the information that we actually have for something like this actually happening, it looks like it would have a positive effect on drug use or little to no effect. So, you know, people, you know, our Orthodox Catholic minister isn't going to suddenly choose to use heroin just because it's legal. You know, that's, if you really think stuff like that's going to happen, I mean, I've got to question your reasoning ability a little bit. You know, of course, there are fringe cases where easier accessibility, knowing that things are exactly what you're trying to buy, you know, it might increase use in certain fringe cases, but I think for all of these dangerous drugs, we will not see some crazy spike in usage. What we will see is probably an overall growth in substance use by a little bit. Probably not that huge, probably not that giant or significant, but probably a little bit of growth. But why is this going to reduce use of these very dangerous drugs as the worst drugs? Well, I mean, people are going to have a whole giant, almost endless list of substances that they can try to get what they want out of life. You know, yeah, your life sucks, you're depressed, you have health problems, you know, you might have some, you know, criminal issues, whatever, you choose to use heroin. You know, that's something, you know, we see. If that person also had, you know, access to all these other drugs and there was more information throughout our entire culture about different substances, they would probably, in many cases, find a substance that works better for them than heroin or meth or bath salts or any of this shit. If we had full across the board legalization, I think, you know, people would start using substances more and word would get out, oh dude, you're on heroin, bro? What are you doing? Like, bro, this fucking XCT 45 is like the shit, man. You don't get half the negative side effects. You can hardly overdose on it. It's nearly impossible. You feel the same. Well, I'd say you even feel better. I mean, this is just some imaginary example of some drug I just created a complete fake name for. But that will happen. That will happen. As more knowledge is spread about substance use, we will find people finding better alternatives. Not just safer alternatives, we will find better substances. And a lot of the ugly substances that we see now will become obsolete. You know, with substances being illegal in many cases, especially, you know, substances just used for recreational purposes that a lot of the time aren't even that dangerous. You know, for those to be illegal actually makes it so that they aren't as good of drugs. They aren't as potent. Not as much is known about them. Not as much is known about the best routes of administration or the best practices for how to use these substances. Or, you know, there's so much that you can get into with this topic. But, yeah, I might make more videos about this in the future. I just kind of started talking about some ideas about how I view, you know, what we could do with substances like this, with mind-altering substances that people take for various different reasons. But yeah, one thing I want you guys to do, and I realize most people probably didn't watch till the end of the video, but if you did, what are your main objections to what I'm suggesting right now? Put those in the comments, and if there are enough of them, when I make a follow-up video going more in depth to this possible policy change, that we might come to, maybe, I mean, it might take 100 years, it might take longer, I don't know, or it might never happen, but put your objections, and I want to do my best to answer those and explain. And maybe there are some really good objections that you'll come up with that will make me reconsider the whole thing. I don't know. But I think for most of the objections that, the average person is going to have when they watch this video, I can probably address and show that it's really not as big of a concern as you think. So yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe, of course. Give it a thumbs up. And again, comment with any objections, questions, or if you agree and think this is a good idea. So, see you guys in another video.